Sabrina's knees slammed against the asphalt, the impact sending shock waves of pain up her thighs. Her hands were already wrenched behind her back, cold metal biting into her wrist before she could even process what was happening. Above her, Officer Miller's voice was a low snarl. "Thought you could just take whatever you wanted, didn't you?" "No, no, please. I work for the family who owns this car." Sabrina's voice came out strangled, breathless. She tried to twist around, tried to make him see her face, see the truth in her eyes. But a gloved hand pressed down on the back of her head, forcing her cheek against the hood of the black Mercedes. The metal was freezing, and she could feel her tears already starting to fall, hot against the icy surface. "Save your lies," Miller snapped, his grip tightening on her arm until she gasped. "We've been watching you, stealing from your employers, driving their cars like you own the place. People like you always think you can get away with it. People like you." The words hit harder than his hands ever could. She wanted to scream that she did own it, that every dollar that paid for this car, every thread of leather in these seats, every inch of this life was as much hers as it was Jun Pyo's. But the words died in her throat, trapped behind the role she'd played for 3 years. The invisible wife, the obedient maid, the woman who made herself small so the world wouldn't notice her, wouldn't use her to hurt the man she loved. Around her, 2 more officers closed in, their faces carved from the same cold stone as Miller's. None of them cared about the registration in the glove box. None of them cared about the truth. They'd already decided who she was the moment they saw her behind the wheel. But let me tell you how Sabrina ended up here, face down on the concrete outside a Chicago gas station, about to make a phone call that would change everything. This began that morning in the sanctuary of the penthouse she shared with Gunn Jun Pyo. The bedroom had been warm, wrapped in the kind of quiet that only exists between 2 people who know each other's breathing patterns by heart. Sabrina had been awake first, watching the early light catch on Jun Pyo's face, softening the sharp angles that terrified everyone else. In sleep, he looked almost gentle. Almost. His eyes had opened slowly, dark and impossibly focused even in those first seconds of consciousness. When he saw her watching him, his hand had come up to cup her face, thumb tracing her cheekbone with a tenderness that would have shocked anyone who knew his reputation. "Stay home today," he'd murmured, his accented English still rough with sleep. It wasn't a command. Jun Pyo never commanded her, but it was close. "Your mother needs her prescription refilled," Sabrina had whispered back, already sitting up, already reaching for the black dress with the white collar hanging on the chair. Her uniform, her disguise. "I'll be back before lunch." She'd watched his expression shift in the mirror as she dressed, watched the way his jaw tightened, the way his hands flexed like he wanted to grab her and keep her there. Gunn Jun Pyo was a man who controlled everything in his world. Politicians, businesses, entire networks of power that stretched from Chicago to Seoul. But he couldn't control the fact that loving Sabrina made him vulnerable. And he couldn't control the sick, twisting feeling in his gut that told him to make her stay. He should have listened to it. Subscribe to see what happens when Jun Pyo discovers where Sabrina is, and comment below with your location. I want to say hello and see how far this story is traveling across the globe. Sabrina was still shaking in the back of the patrol car when Miller shoved her through the precinct doors. Her wrists ached from the cuffs, too tight, biting into her skin until she could feel the blood pulsing hot beneath the metal. The station smelled like burnt coffee and something else. Old sweat, institutional disinfectant, the particular staleness of a place where hope went to die. "Booking?" Miller barked at the desk sergeant, a heavy-set man who barely looked up from his computer. "Grand theft auto, resisting arrest." Sabrina's head snapped up. "I didn't resist anything." Miller's hand clamped down on her shoulder, squeezing hard enough to make her gasp. "You want to add assault on an officer to that list? Keep talking." She bit down on her tongue, tasting copper. Everything Jun Pyo had taught her about staying calm, about not giving them ammunition, was warring with the rage building in her chest. But she was still playing the role, still pretending to be powerless, still the invisible wife who'd learned to make herself small. The processing felt designed to strip away dignity. They took her purse first, dumping the contents onto a scarred metal table. Lipstick, wallet, the bottle of prescription medication she'd been on her way to pick up for Jun Pyo's mother. And then the female officer, badge reading Hayes, noticed the delicate gold chain around Sabrina's neck. "Jewelry off," Hayes said flatly. Sabrina's hand moved to her throat, fingers closing protectively around the chain. Under her collar, hidden from view, was the ring, the platinum band with the single diamond that Jun Pyo had slipped onto her finger 3 years ago in a ceremony that only 5 people had witnessed. "It's just a necklace. Everything comes off. Now." Hayes moved closer, her expression bored but her eyes sharp. She'd done this 1,000 times, stripping people down to nothing, reducing them to property numbers and manila folders. Sabrina's hands trembled as she unclasped the chain. When it pooled in Hayes's palm, the ring slid free from where it had been hidden against Sabrina's collarbone. Under the harsh fluorescent lights, the diamond caught fire. Hayes's eyebrows rose. "Where'd you get this?" "It was my grandmother's." The lie came smooth and practiced, but Sabrina's heart was hammering. That ring was the only physical proof of who she really was, of what she meant to Jun Pyo. Watching it disappear into an evidence bag felt like watching a piece of her identity get locked away. "Sure it was," Hayes muttered, but she processed it anyway, and Sabrina was shoved toward the holding cells before she could protest further. "If this pulls you in, stay with them. Subscribe and don't look away. Their story has just begun, and what happens next will change everything." The cell was exactly what she'd expected. Concrete walls, metal bench, the lingering smell of urine and despair. 3 other women occupied the space, all of them looking at Sabrina with varying degrees of curiosity and pity. But it was the view through the small reinforced window in the door that made Sabrina's blood run cold. She could see directly into the main bullpen, where Miller and 2 other officers were clustered around a computer terminal. One of them was typing. The screen kept changing, and Miller was smiling. They were deleting the dashcam footage. Sabrina watched them work, her breath coming faster, her mind racing through the implications. Without that footage, there was no evidence of what Miller had said, how he'd grabbed her, the slurs he'd thrown like weapons. Without that footage, it was his word against hers, and the system had never been built to believe her word. One of the other women in the cell, older, with tired eyes and gray streaking through her hair, touched Sabrina's arm gently. "First time?" Sabrina couldn't speak. She just nodded, her eyes still fixed on the computer screen where her truth was being erased line by line. "You got anyone on the outside? Anyone who'll come for you?" Did she? Jun Pyo couldn't just walk into a police station. The moment he showed his face, the moment anyone connected her to him, the cover they'd maintained for 3 years would shatter. But watching Miller laugh as he hit the delete key one more time, Sabrina realized the cover was already gone. The only question now was whether she'd let them destroy her in silence, or whether she'd make the call that would burn down everything she'd built to stay safe. The minutes crawled by like hours. Sabrina sat on that metal bench, her back straight despite everything, watching the officers move through their routines like this was just another Tuesday. Like they hadn't just stolen someone's freedom based on the color of her skin and the car she was driving. Like they did this every day. Maybe they did. Miller walked past her cell twice, and both times he made sure she could see his face. See the satisfaction there. See the way he looked at her like she was nothing. Like she'd always be nothing. The 3rd time he passed, he stopped, pressed his face close to the small window. "Comfortable there?" His voice was muffled through the glass, but clear enough. "Better get used to it. By the time we're done processing you, you're looking at county lockup. Maybe even Stateville if we can make the charges stick." He grinned. "Think your employers will visit? Think they'll even remember your name?" Sabrina met his eyes. Didn't flinch. Didn't look away. And something in her expression must have unsettled him because his smile faltered just slightly before he moved on. "That cop's got it out for you," the older woman said quietly. "What did you do?" "I existed," Sabrina said softly. "That was enough. If you feel the injustice rising, stay close. Subscribe so you don't miss what happens when Sabrina stops playing by their rules. Comment what you think she should do." "Phone call," Hayes announced an hour later, unlocking the cell door. "You get one. Make it count." Sabrina's legs felt unsteady as she followed Hayes to the phone bank, ancient payphones bolted to the wall like relics from another era. Her hands were shaking as Hayes removed the cuffs, and for a moment, Sabrina just stared at the phone, her mind spinning through options. She could call a lawyer. That's what a normal person would do. That's what someone with nothing to hide would do. But Sabrina didn't need a lawyer. She needed a wrecking ball. She needed the kind of power that could walk into this building and flip it inside out. She needed her husband. Jun Pyo had given her a number 3 years ago, the night after their wedding. If something happens, he'd said, his face grave in the dim light of their bedroom, if you're ever in danger and you can't reach me any other way, you call this number. You don't explain. You don't stay on the line. You tell me where you are, and I'll come. She'd memorized it that night. I had never used it. Had prayed she'd never need to. Her fingers felt clumsy as she punched in the numbers. The phone rang once, twice. On the third ring, someone picked up, but they didn't speak, just silence on the other end, waiting. Sabrina took a breath. Hayes was standing 6 feet away, pretending not to listen, but clearly monitoring every word. Miller was visible through the doorway, leaning against a desk, arms crossed, looking satisfied. Everything in Sabrina wanted to scream, to rage, to tell Jun Pyo exactly what they'd done to her. But she'd been trained better than that. The 3rd precinct, she said, her voice steady despite everything. Then she hung up. Hayes frowned. That's it? You don't want to... That's all I needed, Sabrina said quietly. She held out her wrist for the cuffs, and Hayes clicked them back into place, shaking her head like Sabrina had just wasted her one chance. But as Hayes led her back to the cell, Sabrina felt something shift inside her chest. The fear was still there, but underneath it was something else, something cold and certain. She'd just lit a fuse, and in about 3 hours, everyone in this building was going to understand what it meant to touch something that belonged to Gunn Jun Pyo. Across the city, in a glass-walled conference room on the 43rd floor of the Gunn Holdings building, Jun Pyo was in the middle of dismantling a merger proposal when his phone vibrated. Not his regular phone, the one that sat on the table in front of him, lighting up constantly with calls from associates and business partners. This was the other phone, the one he kept in his inside pocket, the one that only rang for emergencies, the one that was connected to Sabrina's emergency line. Jun Pyo stopped mid-sentence. The 6 men around the conference table fell silent, watching as his expression changed. The polite interest, the calculated charm he wore like armor in these meetings, it all drained away in an instant. What replaced it was something they'd only heard about in whispers. The face of the man who'd built an empire on the calculated destruction of anyone who crossed him. His hand moved to his pocket in one smooth motion. He pulled out the phone, looked at the screen. 1 missed call, 1 voicemail. He pressed play, and even though the message was only 3 words, those 3 words rearranged his entire world. The 3rd precinct. Jun Pyo's eyes went arctic. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. He stood slowly, buttoning his suit jacket with movements that were too controlled, too precise. Movements that came from a man using every ounce of discipline to keep from putting his fist through the glass wall. When he spoke, his voice was soft, terrifyingly soft. "We're done here." "Sir, we're in the middle of..." one of the executives started. Jun Pyo's head turned, and the man's words died in his throat. "I said we're done." He looked at his second in command, a man named Kang, who'd been with him since the beginning. Kang was already standing, already reading the danger in Jun Pyo's expression, already pulling out his phone. "What do we need?" Kang asked quietly. Jun Pyo's jaw clenched. When he spoke again, his accent thickened with barely controlled rage. "My wife is in police custody. They're holding her at the 3rd precinct." He paused, and something dangerous flickered across his face. Something that made even Kang, who'd seen Jun Pyo do terrible things to terrible people, take a step back. "Get everyone. The lawyers, the accountants, the security team. I want them ready to move in 20 minutes. Jun Pyo's hands flexed at his sides, and Kang could see the dragon tattoo on his neck darkening as the muscles beneath tensed. "And Kang." "Yes, sir?" Jun Pyo's smile was the kind that made smart people run for cover. "Bring the checkbook, and bring the rifles. We're going to negotiate." The lawyers arrived exactly 47 minutes after Sabrina made her call. She couldn't see them from her cell, but she heard the commotion. Raised voices in the precinct lobby, the sharp click of expensive shoes on linoleum, the kind of authoritative tones that came from men who billed $800 an hour and knew it. Through the small window in her cell door, Sabrina watched officers scramble, watched the desk sergeant pick up his phone, watched Captain Mitchell emerge from his office looking annoyed. "I don't care who sent you," Mitchell's voice carried down the hallway, sharp and dismissive. "We're in the middle of processing a suspect, and you can't just walk in here demanding, 'Our client is being held without proper cause.'" The lawyer's voice was crisp, professional, and unbending. "We have documentation proving she had legal permission to operate the vehicle in question. We're demanding her immediate release." Sabrina's heart lurched. Jun Pyo had sent them. He knew. He was coming. But Mitchell just laughed, a sound that made Sabrina's stomach sink. "Your client was caught driving a stolen vehicle. We have probable cause, we have evidence, and we sure as hell don't need permission from some downtown law firm to do our jobs. Now you can wait for her arraignment like everyone else, or you can get the hell out of my precinct. Captain Mitchell, I strongly advise you to reconsider. I strongly advise you to leave before I have you escorted out." Mitchell's voice turned cold, and Sabrina could see him stepping closer to the lawyer, using his height, his badge, and the institutional power of the building around him. "And between you and me, I know exactly who the Gunn family is. I know exactly what kind of operation they run. So if they sent you here to intimidate us, to make this go away, you can tell them it's not happening. Not in my house." The lawyer tried again, his voice rising slightly. "We're prepared to post bail. We have character witnesses ready to testify. We have registered documentation. She hasn't been arraigned yet. No bail, no release, no exceptions." Mitchell crossed his arms. "Your client assaulted an officer during a lawful traffic stop. She's going to county lockup, and if I have anything to say about it, she's going to Stateville after that. Now get out." Sabrina watched the lawyers confer in hushed tones. I watched them make calls on their cell phones, watched them try every legal avenue they had, and watched Mitchell shut them down at every turn, his expression smug, like he was enjoying this. Like he thought his 23 years on the force and his captain's badge made him untouchable. He had no idea he was already dead. He just hadn't stopped breathing yet. The lawyers left 35 minutes later, their faces tight with frustration, and Sabrina felt the last thread of hope start to fray. Jun Pyo had tried the legal route. Mitchell had refused, which meant what came next wouldn't be legal at all. One of the women in the cell touched her arm. "Your people couldn't get you out?" Sabrina shook her head slowly, her eyes still fixed on Mitchell through the window. He was talking to Miller now, both of them laughing about something. Probably her, probably the lawyers. Probably how easy it was to crush someone they thought had no power. "I'm sorry, honey," the older woman said softly. But Sabrina wasn't sorry. Not anymore. Because Jun Pyo had sent lawyers first. He tried to do this the right way, the clean way, the way that wouldn't expose who they were or what he was capable of. And Mitchell had spit in his face. Now Jun Pyo would do it his way. If this scene hits you, pause with me. Like the video if you felt that moment. Subscribe to keep following what happens next. Comment below. Do you think there's any coming back from this? Across town, in an oak-paneled office that overlooked Millennium Park, Mayor Richard Chen was having the worst day of his political career. And it had started with a phone call he couldn't refuse. "Mr. Mayor, Gunn Jun Pyo is here to see you." Chen had frozen at his desk, his coffee halfway to his lips. "I don't have him on my schedule." "He doesn't have an appointment, sir." His secretary's voice had been tight with something Chen recognized as fear. "But he's very insistent, and he has 10 men with him." That had been 40 minutes ago. Now Jun Pyo sat across from Chen's desk, perfectly composed in his black suit, his hands folded calmly in his lap like they were discussing zoning permits instead of the systematic destruction of Chen's career. He looked like a businessman. He looked nothing like the weapon Chen knew him to be. "You understand what you're asking is impossible," Chen said, trying to keep his voice steady, trying to maintain some semblance of authority in his own office. "I can't just hand over a police precinct to a private citizen. The political fallout alone would end my career." "Mayor Chen." Jun Pyo's voice was soft, almost gentle. Your career is already ending. The city is $47 million in debt. Your pension fund is insolvent. Your approval rating is at 23%. And in 6 months, when the state auditors finish their investigation into how federal relief money was allocated during the pandemic, they're going to discover some very interesting discrepancies. The blood drained from Chen's face. I don't know what you're talking about. Of course you don't. Jun Pyo leaned back in his chair, and the movement was predatory, like a cat settling in before the kill. But I do. And more importantly, I have documentation, emails, transaction records, wire transfers to offshore accounts, recordings of phone calls between you and certain contractors who received no-bid contracts worth $8 million. He paused, letting that sink in, watching Chen's face go from pale to gray. Contractors who happened to be your brother-in-law's business partners. Chen's hands were shaking. How I got the information doesn't matter. What matters is what I do with it. Jun Pyo pulled a folder from his briefcase and slid it across the desk with 2 fingers. You have 2 choices, Mayor Chen. You can refuse what I'm asking, in which case every piece of evidence in that folder gets delivered to the FBI, the state's attorney, and every major news outlet in Chicago by midnight tonight. Your career ends. Your freedom ends. And you spend the next 10 to 15 years in a federal prison explaining to your cellmate how you thought you were smarter than the audit trail. Chen opened the folder with trembling hands. Inside was a contract, already drafted, already notarized, already perfect in its legal precision. And if I agree? If you agree, I will clear your deficit, all $47 million, plus another $20 million for your pension fund. The city gets to announce a major public-private partnership that will revolutionize law enforcement and improve community relations. You look like a visionary. You will probably get reelected. Jun Pyo's eyes were black ice, and the evidence disappears. Permanently. Chen read the contract, his hands shaking harder with every line. The 3rd precinct becomes private property, your property. The officers currently employed there will be terminated and replaced with private security of your choosing. The building, the land, all equipment and records transferred to Gunn Holdings. He looked up. This is insane. Even if I wanted to, the city council would never. The city council will approve anything you tell them to approve when you explain that the alternative is municipal bankruptcy. Jun Pyo stood, buttoning his jacket with movements that were too precise, too controlled. Chicago has provisions for privatizing municipal services in cases of financial emergency. You declare the emergency, you fast-track the approval through an executive order citing the fiscal crisis. And by this time tomorrow, your budget is balanced and I own a police station. And if I refuse? Jun Pyo moved to the door, then paused, looking back over his shoulder. Then by this time tomorrow, you're in handcuffs and I own a police station anyway. I'll just buy it from your successor at the bankruptcy auction. His smile was colder than Chen had ever seen. The only difference is whether you walk away from this or get carried away. He left Chen alone in that office, staring at the contract that would save his career and sell his soul in the same signature. Jun Pyo checked his watch as he walked to the elevator. Kang was waiting in the lobby, phone pressed to his ear, coordinating movements like a general planning an invasion. The mayor, Kang asked as Jun Pyo approached, will sign within the hour. He's not stupid enough to go to prison for pride. Jun Pyo's jaw tightened. How long until we can move? The legal team says once the mayor signs, we have immediate ownership. The transfer is instant. Kang hesitated. Sir, are you sure about this? Buying a police station is going to draw attention. Federal attention. The kind we've spent years avoiding. Jun Pyo's eyes went to the window, looking in the direction of the 3rd precinct, even though he couldn't see it from here. Looking toward where Sabrina was sitting in a cell, alone, probably scared, definitely hurting. Because of him. Because she'd married him. Because loving him had put a target on her back that he couldn't erase. I don't care about the attention, he said quietly. Let them come. Let the FBI come. Let the entire federal government come. He turned to Kang, and his second saw something in Jun Pyo's expression that he'd never seen before. Not rage, not calculation. Something deeper. Something that made kingdoms fall and empires burn. They touch my wife, Kang. They put their hands on her. They humiliated her. They deleted evidence to hide what they did. His voice dropped to barely a whisper. I'm going to erase them from existence. And I don't care who's watching. Before we continue, quick question. Where in the world are you watching from? Drop it in the comments and subscribe for free because what happens next is going to redefine what power actually means. The call came through to Captain Mitchell's office at 4:47 p.m. Mitchell answered on the second ring, expecting another complaint from the lawyers, another threat from some downtown firm that thought they could intimidate him. Instead, he got Mayor Chen's voice, tight and strained and furious. Captain Mitchell, you're going to receive official notification in the next 5 minutes. When you do, you're going to comply immediately. Do you understand? Mitchell frowned. Mr. Mayor, I don't know what this is about, but the third precinct has been privatized. As of 10 minutes ago, the building, the land, and all assets are now owned by Gunn Holdings. You and your entire staff are terminated effective immediately. Chen's voice was shaking. Severance packages will be processed according to your contracts, but you need to vacate the premises within the hour. The world tilted sideways. Mitchell gripped his desk to steady himself. What are you talking about? You can't just... It's already done, Captain. The paperwork is filed, the transfer is complete, and if you're smart, you'll leave quietly before the new owner arrives. Chen paused, and when he spoke again, there was something almost like pity in his voice. You arrested Gunn Jun Pyo's wife, Mitchell. Did you really think there wouldn't be consequences? The line went dead. Mitchell sat frozen at his desk, the phone still pressed to his ear, his mind trying to process what he just heard. Gunn Jun Pyo's wife, the maid, the woman currently sitting in cell 3, wearing a cheap black dress and fake pearls. The woman he'd laughed at, humiliated, brutalized. She was married to the most dangerous man in Chicago. The email notification popped up on his computer 30 seconds later. Official transfer documents, signed by the mayor. Notarized, legal, irrefutable. The third precinct was now private property, and he was trespassing. Miller appeared in the doorway. Captain, there's a convoy pulling up outside. 6 black cars, armed men. What do you want us to... We're fired, Mitchell said hollowly. All of us. The precinct's been sold. Miller's face went blank with shock. What? But Mitchell was already standing, already moving to the window, already watching the cars arrive in perfect military formation, watching the men emerge, watching Gunn Jun Pyo step out of the center vehicle, his black coat billowing in the wind, his expression carved from ice and fury. The woman we arrested, Mitchell whispered. She's his wife. Miller's face went from shock to terrified in the space of a heartbeat. Oh, God. Oh, Jesus Christ. What did we... The power cut out. Emergency lights kicked on, bathing the precinct in red. And through the windows, Mitchell watched Jun Pyo walk toward the entrance, flanked by men who looked like they'd done this before. Like taking over buildings was just another Tuesday. The front doors opened. Not kicked in, not forced, just opened. Because someone with a key had unlocked them. Because someone had given Jun Pyo access to everything. He walked into the precinct like he owned it. Because he did. The main room had gone silent. Every officer, every desk sergeant, every person in that building had stopped what they were doing to stare at the man standing in the entrance. Jun Pyo's coat was open despite the cold, revealing the black shirt underneath, unbuttoned just enough to show the dragon tattoo crawling up his neck. His eyes scanned the room with surgical precision, cataloging faces, identifying threats, until they landed on Mitchell. Captain Mitchell, Jun Pyo said, his accented English perfectly clear in the silence. We need to talk. Mitchell's mouth had gone dry. I don't know what you think you're... I think I own this building now. Jun Pyo moved forward, slow and deliberate, his men fanning out behind him. I think you arrested my wife on false charges. I think you brutalized her during the arrest. I think you deleted evidence to cover your crimes. He stopped 3 feet from Mitchell, and the captain could see the rage simmering behind Jun Pyo's controlled expression, could see the violence being held in check by sheer force of will. And I think you're about to face consequences for all of it. Kang appeared at Jun Pyo's shoulder, opening his briefcase. He pulled out a stack of documents and dropped them on the nearest desk. These are your termination papers, Captain Mitchell. You've been fired for cause, specifically for evidence tampering, false imprisonment, assault, and a variety of civil rights violations that my lawyers are currently documenting. He smiled professionally. You'll be hearing from them extensively. You can't do this, Mitchell said, but his voice was weak, unconvincing even to himself. You can't just buy a police station and I already did. Jun Pyo's head tilted slightly. And here's what's going to happen next. You're going to unlock cell 3. You're going to release my wife. You're going to return every item you took from her, including the wedding ring you logged as suspicious jewelry. And then you're going to walk out of this building and pray I never see your face again. Mitchell didn't move. Couldn't move. His entire world was collapsing, and he didn't know how to stop it. Jun Pyo's expression darkened. I can make this easier for you. Kang, show the captain what we found. Kang pulled out a tablet, tapped a few times, then turned it to face Mitchell. On the screen was a bank statement, Mitchell's bank statement, showing deposits that shouldn't be there, money that had come from sources Mitchell had thought were untraceable. You've been taking payments from the Castellano family, Jun Pyo said quietly. My competitors. They've been paying you to look the other way on certain shipments, certain activities. They've been using you as their inside man for the past 18 months. He paused. They're also the ones who told you about my wife driving the Mercedes today. They wanted you to arrest her. They wanted to draw me out. They wanted to use her as bait. Mitchell's face had gone white. I didn't know. You didn't know she was my wife, but you knew she was innocent, and you arrested her anyway. Jun Pyo's voice was soft, deadly. So here's your real choice, Captain. You can leave quietly, take your severance, and disappear. Or I can hand this evidence to the FBI and watch you spend the next decade explaining to federal prosecutors how you became a paid asset for organized crime. His smile was razor thin. What's it going to be? Don't walk away now. This is where everything changes. If you're still here, you're part of this story. Subscribe and watch what happens when justice stops being blind and starts being personal. Mitchell left. He didn't argue, didn't protest, just grabbed his coat and walked out. Miller trailing behind him, both of them looking like ghosts of men who'd thought they were untouchable. The other officers followed, a slow exodus of people who'd suddenly realized that badges and unions and qualified immunity meant nothing when someone with enough money decided they were done. Within 20 minutes, the 3rd precinct was empty except for Jun Pyo's people and the civilians who'd been in holding. Jun Pyo released them all, processed them out, returned their property, sent them home with cash settlements and NDAs that ensured they'd never talk about what they'd witnessed today. All except one. Jun Pyo walked to cell 3 personally, unlocked it himself, and when the door swung open, when he saw Sabrina sitting there on that metal bench in her wrinkled dress, her eyes red but her spine still straight, something in his carefully controlled expression cracked. Jagia, he said softly. My love. Sabrina stood slowly, and for a moment they just looked at each other. Then she crossed the cell in 3 steps and threw her arms around him, burying her face in his chest. Jun Pyo wrapped his coat around her shoulders, one hand cradling the back of her head, the other around her waist, holding her like she might disappear if he let go. I'm sorry, she whispered against his shirt. I should have taken security. I should have. Shh. Jun Pyo pulled back just enough to look at her face, his thumb wiping away the tears on her cheeks. You have nothing to apologize for. Nothing. His jaw tightened. They hurt you? The handcuffs were too tight, and Miller said, her voice caught. Jun Pyo's eyes went dark. I know. I saw the footage before they deleted it. They forgot about the backup server. He pressed his forehead against hers. They're done, Jagia. All of them. And we're going home. Sabrina nodded, but she didn't move toward the door. Instead, she looked up at him, her hands coming up to frame his face. I'm tired of hiding, she said quietly. I'm tired of pretending to be something I'm not. I'm tired of being invisible. Jun Pyo's eyes searched hers. What are you saying? I'm saying I'm done playing the maid. She straightened and even wrapped in his coat, even with tear marks on her face. She looked exactly what she was, a queen who'd been forced to wear a disguise for too long. I'm ready to stand beside you. in public, in daylight. Let them see who I am. Let them see who we are together. Jun Pyo was quiet for a long moment. Then he smiled. A real smile, not the cold, calculated ones he wore for everyone else. You're sure? Because once we do this, there's no going back. The world will know. Everyone will know. Good, Sabrina said. Let them know. Let them see what happens when they touch what's yours. Junpyo kissed her then, soft and fierce and full of promise. When he pulled back, he took her hand, threading their fingers together. Then let's go introduce you to the world, Mrs. Gunn. He led her through the precinct, past Kang and the security team who nodded respectfully, past the empty desks where corrupt cops had sat hours before, past the evidence locker where he personally retrieved her wedding ring and slipped it back onto her finger where it belonged, through the front doors into the afternoon light where news crews had already gathered, cameras rolling, capturing everything. They filmed as Jun Pyo helped Sabrina into his car with a gentleness that contradicted every story they'd ever written about him. They filmed as he cupped her face and kissed her forehead. They filmed as the convoy pulled away, leaving the third precinct behind. Now just another building in Jun Pyo's empire, but one that would forever be remembered as the place where he proved that his wife was worth more than any pretense of secrecy. And by that evening, everyone in Chicago would know the truth. The Gunn family's maid wasn't a maid at all. She was Gunn Jun Pyo's wife, and she just declared war on anyone stupid enough to underestimate her again. Like the video if the ending surprised you. Comment on your reaction or your theory. Subscribe for free so you don't miss the next story, because this is just the beginning of what happens when Sabrina Gunn stops hiding and starts ruling.